you are excited, as am I, to hear from our very own Dr. Faye Williams about her more than 30-year tremendous friendship with Mr. Gregory, Mr. Dick Gregory. And I know that most of you know our sister, our leader, our friend, but it gives me such pride and joy to read some of the things that some of you may not know, and if you know it, you need to hear it again, because we have in our midst a woman who I think is one of the nation's, if not one of the world's, truest leaders, most genuine leaders, most selfless leaders, a faithful leader, someone with tremendous fortitude, tremendous rectitude, someone you can count on at all times to lead us. Dr. Faye Williams is an author, a radio talk show host, a human rights activist, ordained minister, professor and teacher, a businesswoman, attorney, and journalist. Dr. Williams is the national president and CEO of the National Congress of Black Women and former counsel to the United States Congress District of Columbia's Subcommittee on Judiciary and Education. She's a former professor of international law at Southern University Law Center in Baton Rouge. She previously served as chief of staff for the late Honorable Marion Barry. She's a former teacher in the Los Angeles Unified School District. Dr. Faye served President Barack Obama as a member of the Presidential Scholars Commission. She's currently a board member of the World Conference of Mayors. Dr. Williams holds a Master's of Public Administration from the University of Southern California, a Juris Doctorate degree from Howard University School of Law, administration and supervision credentials from UCLA, a BS degree from Grambling State University, and a PhD in public administration from City University of Los Angeles. She completed her doctorate of ministry degree at Wesleyan Theological Seminary. She studied at Atlanta Law School, the University of Michigan, Pepperdine University, and George Washington University, where she received credentials in the Education Policy Fellowship Program at the latter. And in spite of all of these lofty titles and the degrees that she has, Dr. Faye Williams is one of the most humble, one of the most genuine persons I know. She walks with kings and queens, but she never passes a brother or sister on the street who may be in need or just need her to acknowledge them. She was the first African American to run a viable political campaign for the United States Congress in Louisiana. It says here that she narrowly missed victory after a mysterious computer breakdown. Well, I know for a fact, as I volunteered to work on the campaign, she won when we went to bed at night. When we woke up in the morning, they found a few more people who had previously died, who were still on the rolls, and they stole the election. In spite of that, Dr. Williams' spirit didn't break. She stayed focused on the work of the people and the many people, more than 100,000 people, who came to vote for her. She came within 0.6% of being credited with winning the congressional seat, being credited with, even though she did in fact win it. Supporters often refer to her as Louisiana's Congresswoman in exile. She later worked briefly as White House liaison to the United States Department of Energy during the Clinton administration. Dr. Faye Williams is a prolific public speaker. She speaks for numerous events throughout the world, and she speaks for us all, provides voice to us all. She's appeared on many radio and television programs, including BET, CBS, CNN, NPR, Good Morning America, the Canadian Broadcast System, C-SPAN, MSNBC's Hardball, Louisiana Radio Network, and others. She hosts the WPFW-FM radio show called Wake Up and Stay Woke every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. If you have not tuned in, please tune in. It's a source of not just local information, but global information. She does that in remembrance of civil rights activist Mr. Dick Gregory. Please join me in thanking her for being here.
Thank you so much. Welcome to the Marion S. Barry Jr. room. And thank you. That was strictly a best friend, you know, saying all of that stuff about me, because she was only supposed to do about 3 or 4 lines. But anyway, I know that these are my friends who are here this evening and my family, and I appreciate your being here. I'm just coming back off the road from a 6-city tour of book signings. We've had a wonderful time, and I thank you for what you're doing to help to make me a bestseller in just a few weeks.
Amen. So, Dr. Ife, what inspired you to write a book about your friendship with Mr. Gregory?
You know, when he passed away, it was totally unexpected. I don't think anybody in the world ever thought that Dick Gregory would die. I was getting calls from all over the world from people who said, is it true? They could hardly believe it. And in the meantime, I was totally lost. I didn't know what to do because we had done so much together for the past several years. So people began asking me, what would Mr. Gregory say about certain things? And I would simply answer, I don't have to think about it. I know what he would say. I've heard him so many times. He's told me so many things, taught me so many things. So I can tell you exactly what he would think about this, and some of the thoughts that he had came years before the things actually happened. I believe he was prophetic. He knew many things that were about to happen. He pretty much laid out the whole Clinton-Trump race for me, told me what would happen afterwards, all the way up to January 6th. I basically knew that because he had already told me those things would happen.
Oh, absolutely. So what was the common denominator that kept you all together for more than 30 years as friends?
Well, first of all, he had 7 girls, and in my family there are 7 girls, so he thought that he knew girls very well. And of course, he always tried to play my father. He thought that I should get married. I knew that he would never approve of anybody, so there was no need of my even looking for anybody. He would be, you know, a typical father, you know, this guy's not good enough, or what have you. But we had a lot in common. We were both energetic. We both liked to walk. We could get up any hour of the night or the day and walk. Didn't matter whether it was hot, cold, raining, snowing, or what have you. And we both liked to read. And whenever he purchased a book, he purchased one for me, which I later learned was because if he were in some other country or some other state and not near his book, he knew I had the same book. And no matter what time of night it was, I had to get up, go to the page he told me, and give him the exact quote for something. So we were both fearless, I think. We did a lot of things that ordinary people would not do, things that people told you not to do. I can remember one of the things we did was work on the British Petroleum case, where we were trying to get people to sign up for what they would do because they had been damaged during that British Petroleum, or BP as you know it, oil spill. We rode all over the country. We started out from here. We went to New Orleans. We drove to New Orleans, Mississippi, Alabama, on into Pensacola. And you heard me say we, I don't mean we drove, I mean I drove, because he wasn't real crazy about driving. And it was one of the first times I had ever driven an SUV. But the reason for the SUV is his luggage, you see. We stopped at a hotel in Gainesville. We were going to speak at the university there, Florida A&M. And I asked the young man, my bags, I always carry like a roller bag, not very much. I said, would you go up to Mr. Gregory's room and get his luggage? And he took this little roller thing with, I said, no, you're going to need something bigger than that. He said, oh, no, this would be enough. He came back down. He said, this is a record, 11 bags. But in those bags, he always had whatever you needed, whether it was a book, whether it was a vitamin or what have you. He always had it in those bags that he carried around.
So 2 things. You talked about him as a prolific reader. I remember seeing Mr. Gregory walking around with bags and bags of newspapers.
Yes.
And just between those of us in this room, and we'll never tell. Did he really read those newspapers every day?
Absolutely. He spent hundreds of dollars every week on newspapers and magazines, and that's why he could answer almost any question that someone asked him. But the trick is, don't try to tell him about it, because he knew it already. You see, you either have to ask me a question, listen, or you do the talking, but we're not going to both talk about this, you know. He was the expert on it. He would read about things in other countries, in other states, all over. So he knew the one side that might be true. He knew the side that people probably made up, whatever. And he could show you the differences in how stories were written about the same thing all around the world. Now, did he read them all himself? No. I used to have to prop my eyes up to read them to him some nights, because he was determined he was going to get the whole article or the whole book. I read entire books to him some nights, and I was so sleepy I could hardly stay awake. But he had to have it. He had to know what this article totally said, because he read something else maybe that somebody else said. But he was always able to answer questions, and once you asked the question, you were supposed to shut up and listen, maybe for the next several hours, because he was ready to tell it all to you.
So the reading, the writing, the fearless nature were among the many common denominators. And it's interesting that you mentioned the fearless nature of Mr. Gregory. There's a quote in here. It says in chapter 4, you wrote, "Seeing his bravery so often just sealed my belief that fear should never stop anyone from doing the right thing." In what specific ways? Well, let me just change that question a little bit. I know I have known you for so many years, and I've known you to walk into harm's way in the pursuit of peace and justice. I remember one example. I think you went to the Middle East, perhaps alone, and went with a group of women who were being detained so that they would have a champion in their midst. They would calm down, but in pursuit of freeing them. And to me, that was certainly one of the most fearless actions a person can take when they're not in harm's way. She's not been captured. That's it. But she left the safe shores. You are very captivating. But she left safe shores to go to the Middle East and step in harm's way to free some sisters. Tell us about that and other ways in which perhaps you and Mr. Gregory walked in harm's way so that others might be free.
Well, let me just say that he always said God and fear do not occupy the same space. So I believe what he said, and I had been accustomed to doing many things myself. But when we had the first Gulf War, or before we had the first Gulf War, we were trying to prevent it because we were both peace activists. We marched, wherever. We marched in London. We didn't even know the laws there. And we picketed the British Petroleum system. Their offices there, their main offices were there. But he went to Iran, if you remember, years ago when we had people who were captured there and spent months there until the people who were captured were released. He had only gone there to spend a few days, but wound up spending months in prison. But he was sending messages back and forth to the Ayatollah. On the other hand, I went on the tour that you're talking about with a group of women from around the world trying to prevent the first Gulf War. We would stop in many countries. We went to Malta, Tunisia, Libya, Oman, United Arab Emirates, the Sudan, Egypt. Again, holding rallies with women in their countries, trying to get them to influence the men in their country who were seemingly bent on taking us to war. That was during the presidency of George Bush, George H.W., the father, right? George H.W. Bush. Of course, we were away from radio. We kept thinking that James Baker was negotiating and resolving it. So we weren't afraid, not then. Then the day that I should say 20 days before the war actually began, we were on the ship, a group of women, representatives from countries, Japan, Sweden, the Netherlands, all over the Arab nations, France, everywhere. And we were just sailing right along because it was our intention to do the rallies along the way and to, try to prevent the war. We had some women who stayed on the border between Kuwait and Iraq. If you remember, that was also an issue. So 20 days away from the time, we've been on the water 20 days, and 20 days before the war actually started. Well, we were held at gunpoint those 20 days after we were captured by the United Nations forces. And I was one of only 2 Americans on the ship. The other young woman was a journalist for Pacifica, I believe. And her parents sent the ambassador on the ship to order her to come off the ship. And she was very young, so she didn't want to go, but she went. Ambassador, no need to talk to me, because these were my friends, and I was staying with them. Yeah. Meanwhile, I know my sister and others at home were not happy with me because they said it messed up their Christmas. Didn't get home for Christmas or my birthday that year. I spent it on the water at gunpoint. And one morning, my mom woke up and someone called her and said, "Did you see your daughter on television? She's holding this gun, this soldier, she's twisting the gun out of his hand." I was not. I had my hands up and the gun was over on this side of me, so it appeared that I was twisting it out of his hand. But the point is, the American, the person in charge of that event came on the ship, knew me already because I'm now the only American that's left on the ship. He goes, "Hey, Louisiana," he saw that on my passport. "What are you doing on this ship?" So we started to chat, and he then decided, I made a deal with him. I said, "Okay, if you tell your guys to leave the women alone, I'll tell the women to leave the guys alone," because the Libyan women were going to beat them up, even though they had the guns. They were chasing them down. So I became the captain of the ship because the captain was actually arrested at that point and put in a cell on the ship. I had learned the women who spoke French, who could speak Spanish, and the ones who spoke Spanish, who could speak another language, and what have you. I learned all of that being on the water with them for over 20 days to begin with. And so I would call the captain, or whatever his rank was, colonel, of that operation. I remember there was a young man standing there holding his gun on us. And the women were just all of them talking in all kinds of different languages at the time, saying, "Don't you have a mother? Don't you have a sister? Why are you treating us this way?" And the young man, a soldier, was standing there. He told us he was 19 years old, and he said, "They told us we had to do it this way," meaning to rough the women up. Wow. So it was that kind of thing. And I met a brother. He had guns on us too, but we talked about the fact that he lived right down the street from my mother, actually. So we made a deal. If you get home first, call my mother, tell I'm okay, and the same with me. I would call his mother. Later he came to Washington. I did get to know him. We did have lunch together, without the guns, of course. But we were finally allowed to leave after about the 39th day. We were allowed to leave and go directly into Iraq. They tried to make us go back to the Suez Canal, but we said, no, we are going to Iraq. Our friends are there. We had been there to a women's conference before, and we were going to take food, milk, and medicine because the Iraqis were under sanctions at the time. So we went on into Iraq. We just sat there. We wouldn't move until they allowed us to move forward. So we beat the United Nations Army on that one. We went into Iraq on the day that the war was scheduled to start. The Iraqis sent planes down to pick us up at Basra, which is where our ships had come in. And I'm told it's the first thing that was bombed at that, while my sister back there was being very angry with me, I'm sure, because I messed up their Christmas because I wasn't there. But we went into Iraq. They took us to Baghdad, which was the international airport. They sent one plane to take some to Libya, took another plane to Jordan, and my airplane went to Tunisia. We wanted to stay, but they would not allow us to stay. They'd been listening to the news. They knew they were about to be bombed. We did not. So the moment I left Tunisia, got to Paris, where we had a change of flight, the bombs began falling. We had just gotten out of that. Now, that's not the only Christmas I messed up. The next Christmas I went to Haiti. We just go wherever there are problems. So I know my sister back there was angry with me again because here goes another Christmas that is getting messed up. My job was to go to get Wycliffe out. I was supposed to get him signed up, get his passport all ready, but he chickened out at the last minute. He never came to the airport. They thought that they'd been set up and that he had to pass through this route where he might be killed. So I've been many other places simply because they needed help, and sometimes Mr. Gregory has gone with me, and sometimes I've gone with him. We went to London, to British Petroleum. As I said, picketed them without knowing what the laws were there. We went to Senegal. We went just a lot of other places. He went to the pipeline in South Dakota. Now, I did not go with him for the reason that I cannot stand a bit of cold. And so he told me, you stay there, and I stayed here in Washington and just walked and protested with the indigenous women here. That was the one time. It was not fear that kept me from going, it was the cold.
As our fearless leader. So you and Mr. Gregory are champions for civil rights and social justice, for the environment, for women's issues, for global peace. There's another really important aspect of your relationship, and one that you talk about in your book was bringing you together. Were the meals that he would prepare and his leadership as a nutritionist, and someone taught you how to use foods and restraint, fasting as tools as part of the movements.
Yeah, that's right. Well, first of all, after I ran for office in Louisiana, where he had come to do a speech there, to work on the campaign with me at a fundraiser I was having, and I continued to say, my mother taught me this, and my mother taught me that, and my mother taught me. I kept saying, my mother taught me. So he came up on the stage after I finished, and he said, I need to talk to your mother because my children don't listen. They don't know that much that I have taught them. The only time I get a chance to talk with them is that I pull my chair up to the refrigerator, and they're going to come there at some time. That's when I get to talk with them. So when we came back to Washington, I got a call one night, and I didn't know him very well. I mean, I'd known about him, but I didn't know him very well then. But I got a call, hey, baby, you call everybody baby. Can you pick me up? Well, where are you? I'm in Baltimore. This is a Friday night. Well, you all know about the traffic going and coming from Baltimore. I was not happy. But he was so charming. He talked me into coming to pick him up. I did, and on the way back, we talked a lot. And in the days following that, he began inviting people to my house to show them how to make veggie burgers. And he actually showed all of us how to make veggie burgers. His only sin was he used a lot of cheese. So when you put all that cheese on it, it probably was not as healthy as it normally would have been being a veggie burger. But then when we finished the veggie burgers, he decided he needed to teach me how to wash dishes. Well, as a girl in every family, you know how to wash dishes. He said, well, here's what you do. You have to rinse them off, and then you have to put hot water in the sink and a little Clorox in it and let them soak. And then you take that and you put them in the dishwasher. And I'm going like, well, little girl, what is this dishwasher for if you got to do all of that? But he did teach me that all of those are steps you're supposed to take to wash dishes, and he learned that in the Army. He said he just never used it until he started coming to my house, bringing friends to cook for them.
I want to ask another, maybe one or two questions. But the other part is that Dr. Ife was enjoying this remarkable friendship with this incredible man who was married and had all of these children. And you managed not only to have a relationship with him, but a relationship with his wife, Miss Lillian, and his children. Talk to us some about that.
Well, when people saw us together a lot, they would think that I could get him to do something for them, like speak for something or what have you. But he always told you, no matter what, Miss Lillian is in charge of his schedule. He would not have known where to be when if she wanted to call her Lil had not kept his schedule. So he called her. I know he wore those telephone booths out because that's what we had in the beginning. We didn't have cell phones, and he resisted cell phones for a very long time until all the telephone booths were gone. He had to get a cell phone. So he would call home 100 times a day. We could go see a movie. The moment he walked out, he had to call home because he didn't know what he was supposed to do next. Lil, of course, right after he left us, had a birthday, and I helped the family with the birthday. Her son Christian came to work out of our office. He still works with me. Yana, is the performer, the dancer, the singer, everything. He would always get me to go to her shows when he wasn't in town. If he were in town, we'd go together, so I got a chance to know her very well. So I knew most of his children very well. I didn't get to know Greg, the one who had the one name, Gregory, until Mr. Gregory became ill, and he came up to stay with him for a while. Then, of course, the week before Mr. Gregory left us, I was out of town, and when I came back, it was unusual. I hadn't heard from him, so I called Christian, I believe, Christian or Greg, one of the two, and asked, "Where's your father?" Because it was so unusual. I get 100 calls a day too, And they told me he was in the hospital. He was at Sibley. I went. Ayana and I stayed all day until midnight with him, and then one of the sons would come and stay midnight to the morning. And on the morning that he left us, which was a Saturday, he was up and they took him outside. He wanted to go outside. And the doctor had told him that he would be going home the following morning, which would have been Sunday. And about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Lillian and one of the daughters came from Boston. The other daughters had come in from California and New York and wherever they lived. So we were all gathered in the room, as were so many of his friends who just wanted to see him. They couldn't conceive of his being ill, so they came. But about 5 or 5:30 on that Saturday evening, before he was scheduled to go home, just a whole bunch of doctors came in the room and said, "We finally figured out what's wrong with you," which meant he wasn't going home the next day. They had to take him to George Washington Hospital, they said. And so all of us scattered. We went home, and we were going to meet them at George Washington Hospital. By the time I got home, his driver had taken me home. By the time I got home, I had a call from Greg, his son, saying Dad made his transition. I mean, it was like shocking, unbelievable. And then I began getting the messages, calls from California, calls from everywhere, and telling me, first of all, we don't believe this, it's hard to believe, but you're going to have to carry on. You've got to follow in his footsteps. You've got to do the kinds of things that he used to do. So I continued to do that. Of course, it's lonely without him. He gave a lot of leadership. He helped to keep, my spirits up and my wanting to be involved in more and more, because he was afraid of nothing. He had been there the night before in Mississippi when Medgar Evers was shot, and they were kidding around, and Medgar said, "It feels strange, something is strange. It feels like something will happen tonight. Somebody might get killed." And Dick, of course, joked, as he always does, "Well, better you than me." And shortly thereafter, he did get a call that he had to go back to Chicago. His young son had died, his baby son. He had one of his sons who died. So that is the only reason he was not in Mississippi working on the voting rights and our rights. Yeah, he gave up a lot of money, like millions, in order to do that. But he was so concerned about our civil and human rights. He worked not only for our civil and human rights, but he did for Native Americans, helped them to get their fishing rights, just whoever needed help, without regard to race or creed or culture. If he believed in what they were doing, he got involved in it. And I was involved in many of those things, like all of the murders that went on, Trayvon Martin. We were all over the country, whenever there was picketing or rally somewhere, we did that. Jordan Davis from Florida, the same thing. We were involved in all of those. We were expected to be there. And if he were there, people would say, "Where's Faye?" If I was there and he was not, they would say, "Where's Dick?" So it was just like that. We were just kind of a twosome. We were running buddies, I guess you would say. And that's something I really miss, but I still try to carry on much of the work that we started.
I can imagine a tremendous loss from such a special, special best friend. If Mr. Gregory were here today, do you have any sense of how he would assess the land today, where we are with this administration, where we are in the globe? Any sense of where he sees us, or what he would want you to help lead us through, or any sense of anything like that?
Well, he would be there too, but I know that he would say, you know what he always said, I told you niggas to wake up and stay woke.
Wake up and stay woke.
And so that's the name of my book, that's the name of my radio program.
Join me in thanking Dr. Ife, but I also would like to have about 5-6 minutes of questions, if anyone has any questions.
Comments or stories.
comments.
Stories they know about.
And is there anything that you wish that I asked you that I didn't?
How much money I need for tomorrow?
How much money she needs for tomorrow? We will get it. Did somebody have a question?
The gentleman over
Yes,
here.
sir.
I just